Sarah Matthews awakened to the familiar sound of wind threading through the window cracks. The small house groaned softly, as it always did on cold October mornings. At 32, she had learned to interpret every noise those old walls made. They were like whispers of a life that insisted on continuing even after William. "Mama," Lily's gentle voice echoed down the narrow hallway. "Coming, sweetheart." Sarah ran her hands over her tired face and rose from the bed she had once shared with her husband. 3 years, 3 long years since the fever had taken him, leaving her alone with Emily, 12 years old, Clara, 8, and little Lily, only 5. The smell of damp wood hung in the air. Sarah looked through the fog window and saw the dense forest that surrounded their property, its tall trees like silent sentinels. Today she would need to gather firewood. Winter was approaching, and they didn't have much coal left. "Emily, watch your sisters. I'm going to the forest." The eldest girl nodded, her eyes too serious for someone her age. Sarah picked up the small axe and wicker basket. She didn't know that this ordinary morning would change their lives forever. The forest awaited her, holding secrets that would soon come to light. The forest floor crunched beneath Sarah's worn boots as she ventured deeper into the familiar maze of oak and pine trees. Morning mist clung to the branches like ghostly fingers, and somewhere in the distance, a cardinal called out its sharp, clear song. She had walked this path countless times since William's death, finding solace in the rhythm of gathering wood, the simple task that kept her hands busy and her mind from wandering too far into darker territories. Her basket was already half full, with dry branches when she heard it, a sound that didn't belong to the forest's natural symphony. A low groan, barely human, coming from somewhere beyond the thick cluster of elderberry bushes to her left. Sarah froze, her grip tightening on the axe handle. Wild animals weren't uncommon in these parts, but this sound carried a different quality. Pain. Human pain. "Hello," she called softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Silence answered her, followed by another groan, weaker this time. Against every instinct that screamed at her to turn back, Sarah pushed through the bushes, thorns catching on her faded blue dress. What she found made her breath catch in her throat. A man lay crumpled against the base of a massive elm tree, his dark hair matted with dry blood, his clothes torn and stained. His skin was bronze, weathered by sun and wind. An intricate tattoos marked his arms, markings she recognized from the stories told in hushed voices at the general store. A native man. Her first impulse was to run. Everything she had been taught, every warning she had heard about his people, surged through her mind like a flood. They were dangerous, savage enemies. But as she took a step backward, ready to flee, the man's eyes fluttered open, dark eyes, filled not with violence or threat, but with a pain so profound it reminded her of her own reflection. In the weeks after William's funeral, "Please," he whispered, the single word carrying the weight of desperation. Sarah's hand went instinctively to her throat, her heart hammering against her ribs. This man was dying. Whatever had brought him to this state, whether conflict with his own people or with the soldiers who patrolled these areas, he was no threat to anyone now. She thought of Emily, Clara, and Lily waiting at home. She thought of William, who had always said that mercy was never wasted on those who truly needed it. She thought of herself, a woman who had learned that survival sometimes meant making choices that others might not understand. "Can you walk?" she asked, moving closer despite her trembling hands. The man tried to push himself up against the tree trunk, wincing as the movement sent visible waves of pain across his features. I don't know." Sarah set down her basket and axe, kneeling beside him to examine his wounds. A deep gash ran along his left shoulder, and his right leg appeared to be injured. Though not broken, he had lost blood, but not so much that he couldn't be saved with proper care. "What's your name?" she asked, surprising herself with the steadiness of her voice. "Joshua," he replied, his eyes searching her face for signs of hostility or fear. "I'm Sarah." She paused, weighing her next words carefully. "I'm going to help you, Joshua, but you have to trust me." For a moment, they looked at each other across the vast divide of their different worlds, two souls marked by loss and hardship, recognizing something familiar in each other's pain. Getting Joshua to the house proved more challenging than Sarah had anticipated. He could barely stand, leaning heavily against her small frame as they made their way through the forest. Every few steps, he would pause, breathing heavily, his face pale with the effort. "Almost there," Sarah whispered, though she wondered if she was reassuring him or herself. The back of her property came into view through the trees, and Sarah felt a surge of relief mixed with panic. How would she explain this to the girls? How could she hide a grown man in their tiny house without raising questions? "There's a small room behind the kitchen," she said quietly as they approached the house. "My husband used it for storing tools. You'll be safe there." Joshua nodded weakly, too exhausted to speak. Sarah helped him through the back door, grateful that the girls were likely still having breakfast in the front room. The storage room was cramped and dusty, with a small window that faced the forest, but it would have to do. She helped Joshua settle onto some old blankets she quickly arranged on the floor. "Mama," Emily's voice carried from the kitchen. "You've been gone a long time." "Just coming, dear," Sarah called back, her voice catching slightly. She turned to Joshua, who was watching her with those dark, pain-filled eyes. "I'll bring you water and something for those wounds, but you must stay quiet, please." He nodded, understanding the gravity of their situation. Sarah slipped out of the room, closing the door behind her, and entered the kitchen where all three girls were waiting. Emily's sharp gaze immediately noticed her mother's disheveled appearance. "What happened to your dress, Mama?" Clara asked, pointing to the tears from the thorns. "I caught it on some branches, sweetheart. Nothing to worry about." Sarah moved to the wash basin, trying to compose herself. "Emily, could you help Clara with her reading lessons? I need to prepare some things." Emily's eyes narrowed slightly, but she nodded. At 12, she had learned to read her mother's moods, to sense when something was different. But she had also learned not to push when Sarah needed space. Throughout the day, Sarah found excuses to slip away. She brought Joshua water, clean cloth for his wounds, and some of the soup she had made for lunch. Each time, she found him exactly where she had left him, making no sound, asking for nothing beyond what she offered. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly during one of her visits, as she cleaned the gash on his shoulder. "I know the risk you're taking." Sarah paused in her ministrations. "When my husband was dying, a stranger, a traveling doctor, stopped to help. Even though we couldn't pay him, he said healing was a choice we make, not just for others, but for ourselves." Joshua was quiet for a long moment. "Your husband was a fortunate man. I was the fortunate one," Sarah replied softly. That evening, as she tucked the girls into bed, Emily lingered at her bedside. "Mama, is everything all right?" she asked, her young face serious with concern. Sarah smoothed Emily's dark hair, so like her own. "Sometimes, sweetheart, life asks us to be braver than we think we can be, but we manage, don't we?" Emily nodded solemnly. "We always manage." Later that night, Sarah lay awake listening to the house settle around her in the room behind her kitchen. A wounded stranger trusted her with his life. In the beds down the hall, her daughters slept peacefully, unaware that their world had shifted once again. She wondered what William would have done. She wondered if she was being foolish or brave. But mostly, she wondered how long she could keep the secret and what would happen when she could no longer hide the truth. 3 days passed before Joshua was strong enough to sit up properly. Sarah had managed to keep his presence hidden, though she noticed Emily watching her with increasingly curious eyes. The girl was too perceptive for her own good, inheriting William's ability to sense when something wasn't quite right. On the 4th morning, as Sarah brought Joshua fresh water and some bread, she found him attempting to stand. "You shouldn't be moving yet," she said, setting down the small tray. I've imposed on your kindness long enough, Joshua replied, though his voice still carried the weakness of recovery. My wounds are healing. I should go. Sarah studied his face, noting the stubborn set of his jaw despite the pallor of his skin. Where will you go? The question hung in the air between them. Joshua looked away, toward the small window that faced the forest. I don't know. For the first time since she had found him, Sarah truly looked at this man she had been caring for. The tattoos on his arms told stories she couldn't read, but she could see they were carefully crafted, meaningful. His hands, despite their current weakness, showed the calluses of someone who worked with skill and precision. What happened to you out there? She asked gently. Joshua was quiet for so long that Sarah thought he wouldn't answer. Then, slowly, he began to speak. My tribe was divided. Some wanted to make peace with the soldiers, to move to the reservation as demanded. Others, like me, believed we should stay on our ancestral lands. His voice grew heavy with memory. During a council meeting, words turned to anger to violence. I spoke against leaving, and some of my own people turned on me. They left me in the forest, saying if I loved the land so much, I could die on it. Sarah felt her chest tighten with unexpected emotion. Your own people did this to you? Fear makes people do things they never thought possible, Joshua said quietly. They were afraid of what would happen if they didn't comply with the soldiers' demands. They were afraid of starving on the reservation. They were afraid of me, because I reminded them of what they were losing. Sarah understood the kind of fear, the fear that came with impossible choices, but trying to protect those you love when every option seemed wrong. I know something about loss, she said softly. When William died, I was so angry. Angry at him for leaving, angry at myself for not being able to save him, angry at God for taking the only person who truly understood me. Joshua's dark eyes met hers. How did you find peace? I haven't, Sarah admitted with a sad smile. But I found purpose. My girls needed me to be more than my grief. Some days, that's enough. Your husband, what was he like? Sarah's expression softened, kind to kind. Sometimes he would give away our last loaf of bread if someone needed it more than we did. He believed people were basically good, even when evidence suggested otherwise. He sounds like a man who would have helped a wounded stranger, Joshua observed. He would have. Sarah agreed, without hesitation. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. To people who had learned that healing sometimes required sharing the weight of old wounds. I make things, Joshua said eventually, with wood, with stone. It helps me remember who I am beyond the pain. Sarah nodded. Show me, when you're stronger. I'd like to see what your hands can create when they're not just focused on surviving. Outside, they could hear the girls playing in the yard, their laughter a sweet counterpoint to the heavy conversation. For the first time in days, Sarah allowed herself to believe that maybe, somehow, this impossible situation might lead to something beautiful rather than tragic. It was Lily who discovered him first. Sarah had grown perhaps too comfortable in her routine of caring for Joshua, too confident that her careful timing and quiet movements would continue to go unnoticed. On the sixth morning, while she was hanging laundry outside, little Lily wandered into the kitchen searching for her favorite wooden spoon, the one she used to cook in her imaginary games. Sarah heard the gasp from inside the house, followed by complete silence. Her blood turned cold. She dropped the wet sheet she was holding and rushed inside, finding Lily standing frozen in the doorway of the storage room, her wide blue eyes fixed on Joshua, who was sitting up against the wall, equally startled. For a moment, none of them moved. Then Lily's bottom lip began to tremble, and Sarah quickly scooped her up before she could cry out. Shh, sweetheart, Sarah whispered, carrying Lily to the kitchen table. It's all right. But Lily's eyes remained fixed on the doorway, her small body tense with confusion and fear. Joshua appeared in the doorway, moving slowly, his hands visible and open in a gesture of peace. Despite his weakness, he had managed to stand, I'm sorry, he said quietly to Sarah. I heard her looking for something. I didn't want to startle her by staying hidden. Mama, Lily whispered, her voice very small. Who is that man? Sarah's mind raced. She had planned for this moment, rehearsed different explanations. But facing her youngest daughter's innocent fear made every practice word disappear. This is Joshua, she said simply. He's been hurt, and I've been helping him get better. Like when Papa was sick, Lily asked, and Sarah felt her heart clench at the comparison. Yes, sweetheart, like that. Joshua remained in the doorway, not moving. Closer but not retreating either. Hello, Lily, he said softly. Your mother has told me about you. She says you're very good at taking care of people. Lily studied him with the unfiltered curiosity of a 5-year-old. You're different, she observed with startling directness. Yes, Joshua agreed. I am. Are you? Bad, she asked, the question that had been taught to her by a society that painted his people as enemies. Joshua considered the question seriously, as if it deserved an honest answer rather than dismissal. I don't think so, but I suppose you'll have to decide for yourself. At that moment, Emily and Clara's voices echoed from the front of the house, returning from their morning walk to gather eggs from their neighbors' chickens. Sarah's stomach dropped. If Lily had found Joshua, Emily wouldn't be far behind, and Emily would ask much harder questions. Lily, Sarah said quickly, Joshua is our secret right now. Do you understand? Like a surprise we're keeping. Lily nodded solemnly, though Sarah could see she didn't fully understand why secrecy was necessary. Emily's footsteps approached the kitchen, and Sarah made a quick decision. Joshua, stay here. Let me talk to them. But Emily was already in the doorway, her arms full of eggs, when she saw the strange tableau before her. Her sharp eyes took in everything. Her mother's tense posture, Lily's wide-eyed expression, and the stranger standing in their storage room. The eggs crashed to the floor, shells splintering and yolks spreading across the worn wooden boards. Emily, Sarah began, but her eldest daughter was already backing away, her face pale with shock and something that looked dangerously close to betrayal. Mama, Emily whispered, what have you done? Behind her, Clara peered around the doorframe, her mouth forming a perfect O of surprise. Sarah looked at her 3 daughters, then at Joshua, who remained perfectly still in the doorway. The secret was out. Now came the much harder part, helping her children understand that sometimes the right choice looked nothing like what the world told them was safe. The silence stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. Emily's eyes darted between her mother and the stranger, her young face cycling through emotions too complex for her age. Confusion, fear, and something that looked like disappointment. Girls, sit down, Sarah said, her voice steadier than she felt. Please. Clara immediately obeyed, settling into her usual chair at the kitchen table, her curious gaze never leaving Joshua. But Emily remained standing, her arms crossed defensively across her chest. You lied to us, Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper but carrying the weight of accusation. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. I didn't lie, Emily. I needed time to figure out how to explain. Explain what? That you brought a savage into our house. The ugly word fell from Emily's lips like poison, repeating what she had undoubtedly heard from others in town. Joshua flinched as if struck, but he didn't defend himself or retreat. Instead, he slowly lowered himself to sit on the floor, making himself less imposing, less threatening. Emily, Sarah said sharply, the word is not welcome in this house. But Mama, Clara piped up, her 8-year-old voice filled with genuine confusion. Mrs. Henderson says Indians are dangerous. She says they steal children, and Mrs. Henderson, Sarah interrupted firmly, has never met a native person in her life. She's repeating stories that aren't true. How do you know they aren't true? Emily demanded, her voice rising. How do you know he won't hurt us? Joshua cleared his throat softly. May I speak? Emily's jaw set stubbornly, but she didn't object. My name is Joshua, he began, his voice calm and measured. 6 days ago, I was left for dead by people from my own tribe because I disagreed with their decisions. Your mother found me and chose to save my life, even though helping me put her own family at risk." He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. "I understand your fear, Emily. It's wise to be cautious of strangers. But I want you to know that I would rather die than bring harm to the woman who saved me, or to her children." "You can't know that," Emily said, but some of the heat had gone out of her voice. "You're right," Joshua agreed. "You can't know my heart just by my words. But perhaps you could know me by my actions." Sarah watched this exchange with her heart in her throat. Emily had always been protective of their small family, suspicious of outsiders since William's death. But she was also intelligent, capable of reason when given the chance. "What kind of actions?" Emily asked warily. Joshua gestured toward his injured shoulder. "I'm not strong enough to be a threat to anyone right now, but I am strong enough to be useful. Your mother tells me you need firewood for winter. I know the forest well. I can show you which trees are already dead and safe to harvest, which areas to avoid. I can gather firewood myself," Emily said stiffly. "I'm sure you can. But wouldn't it be better to work smarter instead of harder?" Little Lily, who had been silent through this exchange, suddenly spoke up. "Can you make things?" "Mama said you make things." Joshua's stern expression softened as he looked at the youngest girl. "Yes, I can." "Would you like to see?" From his pocket, he pulled out a small carving, a bird in flight, its wings spread wide, carved from a piece of dark wood. The detail was exquisite, each feather carefully etched. Clara gasped with delight. "It's beautiful." Even Emily's defensive posture relaxed slightly as she stared at the intricate carving. "I made it while I was recovering," Joshua explained. "Your mother brought me a piece of wood to keep my hands busy. It helps me think. Could you teach me?" Clara asked shyly. Sarah held her breath, waiting for Emily's reaction. Her eldest daughter was the gatekeeper of trust in their family. If Emily couldn't accept Joshua, the situation would become impossible. Finally, Emily uncrossed her arms. "I suppose," she said carefully, "if you're going to be here anyway, you might as well make yourself useful." It wasn't acceptance, not yet, but it was a beginning. Over the next week, an uneasy routine settled over the Matthews household. Joshua remained in the storage room during the day, but as his strength returned, he began to venture out in the evenings when the risk of unexpected visitors was minimal. Emily maintained her cautious distance, watching Joshua's every move with sharp, evaluating eyes. She had appointed herself as the family's protector, a role that sat heavily on her 12-year-old shoulders, but one she took seriously. Every morning, she would check the room where Joshua stayed, as if ensuring he hadn't vanished in the night, or, worse, done something to threaten their safety. Clara, meanwhile, had overcome her initial fear with the adaptability of childhood. She would linger near the doorway during mealtimes, fascinated by Joshua's quiet movements and the way he seemed to listen to sounds in the forest that none of them could hear. "Why do you turn your head like that?" she asked one evening, watching. Joshua paused mid-conversation to listen. "The forest talks," Joshua explained simply. "Right now, it's telling me that a storm is coming tomorrow. The birds are flying lower, seeking shelter." Clara's eyes widened with wonder. "Can you teach me to hear it too?" "If you're willing to learn patience," Joshua replied with a hint of a smile. It was Lily, however, who proved to be Joshua's unexpected ally. The 5-year-old possessed none of Emily's suspicion or Clara's cautious curiosity. To her, Joshua was simply another adult in their house, someone who spoke softly and moved carefully, like her mother did when she was worried about something. "Joshua," Lily announced one morning, marching into the storage room with characteristic determination. "Mama says you're sad because you miss your family." Sarah, who had been changing the bandage on Joshua's shoulder, froze at her daughter's directness. "Yes," Joshua answered honestly. "I do miss them. I miss Papa too." Lily said matter-of-factly. But Mama says he's watching over us from heaven. Maybe your family is watching over you too. Joshua's throat worked silently for a moment. That's a comforting thought, little one. Would you like to see Papa's picture? Lily asked. Mama keeps it on her dresser. He was very handsome, and he had kind eyes like yours. Sarah felt her breath catch in 3 years. Lily had rarely spoken about William so openly, certainly never to a stranger. I would be honored to see your Papa's picture, Joshua said solemnly later that day. When the girls were outside playing, Sarah found Joshua sitting by the small window, holding the framed photograph that Lily had brought him. William's gentle smile looked back from the glass, frozen in a moment of happiness from their early marriage. She's right, Joshua said quietly. He has kind eyes. Sarah sat down beside him, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. She doesn't usually talk about him with other people. You must make her feel safe. Children see truth more clearly than adults sometimes, Joshua replied. They haven't learned to hide their hearts behind walls of fear and prejudice. Emily's trying to protect us, Sarah said, feeling the need to defend her eldest daughter. I know, and I respect her for it. A family needs a guardian when the world seems dangerous. Joshua set the photograph down carefully. But I hope, in time, she'll see that I want to be part of protecting this family, not a threat to it. That evening, as Sarah prepared supper, she noticed Emily watching Joshua help Clara with a small carving project. The girl's expression was thoughtful rather than suspicious, as if she was beginning to see something she hadn't expected. He's different from what they said he'd be, Emily admitted quietly to her mother. People often are, Sarah replied, hope blooming in her chest like the first flowers of spring. As October faded into November, Joshua's physical strength returned, but with it came a restlessness that Sarah recognized. He was a man accustomed to purpose, to contributing, and the role of hidden guest weighed heavily on him. I need to do something useful, he said one evening as Sarah brought him his supper. I can't continue to take from your family without giving something back. Sarah sat down across from him on an overturned crate that had become her usual seat. During their evening conversations, you're healing. That's enough for now. No, Joshua said firmly but gently. It's not enough. Winter is coming, and you're worried about money. I can see it in your face when you think no one is looking. Sarah's shoulders sagged slightly. He was right, of course. The small savings William had left were nearly depleted, and her occasional work taking and mending barely covered their basic needs. The approaching winter meant higher costs for firewood and food, expenses that kept her awake at night calculating and recalculating their meager resources. What could you do? She asked, not unkindly but practically. You can't exactly walk into town and look for work. Joshua's eyes lit up with an idea that had clearly been forming in his mind. My hands. Sarah, I can create things people want to buy. He disappeared into the storage room for a moment and returned with several small objects he had been crafting during his recovery. Besides the bird he had shown the girls, there was a delicate wooden bowl carved from a single piece of oak, its grain flowing like water, a set of small animals, a rabbit, a deer, a fox, so lifelike they seemed ready to spring from his palms. A hair comb adorned with intricate patterns that caught the lamplight. Sarah picked up the bowl, running her fingers over its smooth surface. The craftsmanship was extraordinary, the kind of quality that would command good prices in town. These are beautiful, Joshua, but how could we sell them? People would ask questions about where they came from, not if you said you made them. Joshua suggested you could say you learned woodworking from your late husband. People would understand a widow finding new ways to support her family. The plan was both brilliant and risky. Sarah could indeed claim the pieces as her own work, and Joshua could continue creating them in secret. The income could mean the difference between a comfortable winter and a desperate one. The girls would have to be part of the secret, Sarah mused, especially Emily. She figured it out anyway. Over the next few days, they refined their plan. Joshua would create pieces using tools and materials Sarah could obtain without suspicion. She would take them to town on her weekly trips, claiming to have recently taken up woodworking as a way to supplement their income. Emily, when presented with the plan, surprised them all with her practical acceptance. "It's dishonest," she said, matter-of-factly, "but it's not stealing, and it's not hurting anyone. Papa always said that taking care of family sometimes means being creative with the truth." Clara and Lily were thrilled to be part of what they saw as an exciting secret. Clara especially enjoyed watching Joshua work, learning to identify different types of wood and understanding how the grain affected what could be carved from each piece. "The wood tells you what it wants to become," Joshua explained to her as he worked on a new piece. "You just have to listen." "Like how the forest talks?" Clara asked. "Exactly like that." Sarah's first trip to town with a small collection of Joshua's work was nerve-wracking. She had practiced her story, a recently discovered talent, something to keep her hands busy during the long evenings. But her heart hammered as she approached Mrs. Peterson's shop. "Sarah Matthews," Mrs. Peterson exclaimed when she saw the carved pieces. "I had no idea you were so talented. These are absolutely exquisite." 3 pieces sold immediately, bringing in more money than Sarah typically earned in a month of mending. Walking home with coins heavy in her pocket, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years: hope for financial security. Joshua was waiting anxiously when she returned, and the smile that spread across his face when she showed him the earnings was worth more than the money itself. "We did it," she said simply. "No," Joshua replied. "You did it. You're the one taking all the risks." But as Sarah looked at her daughters, who were excitedly counting the coins, she knew they were all taking risks now, and perhaps, for the first time since William's death, they were all truly working together as a family. The success of Sarah's woodworking venture brought unexpected complications. Within 3 weeks, word of the beautiful handcrafted pieces had spread throughout the small town of Millbrook. Orders began arriving faster than Joshua could fulfill them, even working by lamplight long into the evening hours. Double quotes Mrs. Matthews, said Mr. Henderson, the general store owner, during Sarah's latest visit to town. "Folks are mighty impressed with your work. Where did you learn such fine craftsmanship?" Sarah had rehearsed this answer countless times. "My late husband started teaching me before he passed. I've been practicing in the evenings." "Well, you've got quite a talent. Reminds me of some native work I've seen. That attention to natural detail. You know, course. Theirs is usually more primitive." Henderson's casual racism made Sarah's stomach turn, but she kept her expression neutral. "I just try to bring out what's already in the wood," she replied, echoing Joshua's words. It was on a cold December morning that Sarah first noticed the stranger in town. A tall man in a crisp military uniform, his bearing straight and authoritative. Captain Mitchell, as she later learned, had recently been assigned to the regional garrison with specific orders to monitor and relocate any native people found living outside designated areas. "New fellow's been asking questions," Mrs. Peterson mentioned as Sarah delivered another batch of carved items. "Wanted to know about any suspicious activity in the area. Indians, specifically." Sarah's blood ran cold, but she managed to keep her voice steady. "What kind of questions?" "Oh, the usual concerns. Making sure there aren't any savages hiding in the woods, threatening decent folk." Mrs. Peterson lowered her voice conspiratorially. "Though between you and me, I think he's being overly cautious. We haven't had Indian troubles in these parts for years." That evening, Sarah shared her concerns with Joshua, who received the news with troubling calm. "It was bound to happen eventually," he said quietly. "Men like this Captain Mitchell, they're thorough. They don't stop looking until they find what they're seeking or until they're convinced it isn't there." "Maybe you should leave," Sarah said, though the words felt like glass in her throat. "Just until he moves on to another area." Joshua looked at her steadily. Is that what you want? The question hung between them, loaded with months of shared meals, quiet conversations, and the growing sense that their arrangement had become something deeper than mere charity. Sarah thought of how Emily now sought Joshua's opinion on practical matters, how Clara had learned to carve her own small animals, how Lily had started calling him Uncle Joshua when she thought no one was listening. No, Sarah admitted, it's not what I want, but I'm scared, Joshua, not just for you, but for my girls. If we're discovered, then we'll be very careful, Joshua said firmly. I won't let my presence bring harm to your family. But being careful became increasingly difficult. As Captain Mitchell's investigation intensified, he began making rounds to outlying properties, introducing himself to families, asking seemingly casual questions about anything unusual they might have observed. He was here yesterday, Emily reported after returning from a trip to fetch water from the well, talking to the Hendersons. Mrs. Henderson pointed toward our house when they were talking. Sarah felt the walls of their carefully constructed secret beginning to close in around them. The success that had brought them financial stability was also drawing exactly the kind of attention they couldn't afford. That night, as she listened to Joshua moving quietly around the storage room, Sarah made a decision that frightened and strengthened her in equal measure. Whatever came next, she wouldn't face it alone. They had built something together, this patchwork family of wounded souls, and she wasn't going to let fear tear it apart. But as she heard unfamiliar hoofbeats on the road outside her house, growing closer in the pre-dawn darkness, she wondered if the choice would be taken out of her hands entirely. The sound stopped directly in front of her gate. The knock came at dawn, sharp and authoritative. Sarah had been lying awake for hours, listening to those hoofbeats that had stopped outside her gate, waiting for this moment she had dreaded since Captain Mitchell's arrival in town. Mrs. Matthews, the voice carried the crisp authority of military command. Captain Mitchell, Regional Garrison, I'd like to speak with you, if I may. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs as she quickly threw on her robe. Through the thin walls, she could hear Joshua moving silently, no doubt preparing to hide deeper in the storage room. The girls were still asleep, unaware that their carefully constructed world was about to be tested. Just a moment, Sarah called, buying time to compose herself. When she opened the door, Captain Mitchell stood before her in full uniform, his pale eyes scanning her face with uncomfortable intensity. He was younger than she had expected, perhaps 35, with the kind of rigid bearing that spoke of a man who had never learned to doubt his own authority. I apologize for the early hour, Mum, but I'm conducting a routine security survey of the area. May I come in? It wasn't really a question, and they both knew it. Sarah stepped aside, her mind racing through possible explanations for anything Mitchell might notice. The extra dishes, the additional bedding she sometimes washed, the small wood shavings that inevitably scattered near Joshua's workspace, coffee she offered, hoping her voice sounded steadier than she felt, that would be appreciated. Mitchell's eyes were already cataloging her small home, taking in details with practiced efficiency. I understand you've recently started a woodworking business. Yes, sir. Since my husband passed, I've needed to find ways to supplement our income. Admirable. Self-reliance is a virtue. Mitchell accepted the coffee cup, but didn't sit when Sarah gestured toward the table. Instead, he wandered closer to the kitchen, his gaze lingering near the storage room door. Your work has gained quite a reputation in town. Unusual quality for someone who's supposedly self-taught. Sarah's throat went dry. My husband started teaching me before he died. I've had time to practice. Mitchell sipped his coffee, his expression non-committal. The thing is, Mrs. Matthews, I've seen similar craftsmanship before in native settlements. There's a particular attention to natural grain, a way of working with the wood rather than against it. That's quite distinctive. I wouldn't know about that. Sarah managed. At that moment, Lily's sleepy voice drifted from the hallway. Mama, who's here? Just a visitor. Sweetheart, go back to bed. But Lily, with the contrary nature of tired 5-year-olds, padded into the kitchen in her nightgown, rubbing her eyes. She stopped short when she saw the uniformed stranger, instinctively moving closer to her mother. "Well, hello there," Mitchell said, his stern expression softening slightly. "What's your name?" "Little one, Lily," she answered shyly, then brightened. "Do you want to see the bird Uncle Joshua carved for me?" Sarah's world stopped. She felt the blood drain from her face as Lily's innocent words hung in the air. Like a death sentence, Mitchell's eyes sharpened instantly. "Uncle Joshua, Lily," Sarah said quickly. "Why don't you go wake your sisters? Tell them we have company." But the damage was done. Mitchell set down his coffee cup with deliberate precision, his hand moving to rest on the pistol at his belt. "Mrs. Matthews, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I strongly advise you to answer truthfully. Are you harboring a native man on this property?" Sarah looked at her youngest daughter, whose confused expression showed she was only beginning to understand that she had said something wrong. She thought of Joshua, probably listening to every word from his hiding place. She thought of Emily and Clara, still sleeping, unaware that their lives were about to change forever. "Captain Mitchell," she said, lifting her chin with a dignity that surprised even her. "I am harboring a human being who was dying when I found him. What he is beyond that shouldn't matter to anyone with a conscience." Mitchell's face hardened. "Ma'am, you're under arrest for aiding and concealing a fugitive enemy, and I'm going to search this house until I find him." As if summoned by her words, Joshua emerged from the storage room, his hands raised, his dark eyes meeting Sarah's across the kitchen. "There's no need to search," he said quietly. "I'm here." The jail cell in Millbrook was small and damp, with iron bars that had seen better days. Sarah sat on the narrow cot, her mind racing despite her exhaustion. It had been 2 days since Mitchell had arrested both her and Joshua, leaving the girls in the care of Mrs. Peterson, who had reluctantly agreed to take them in until this mess could be sorted out. Joshua occupied the cell across from hers, and they had spoken little since their arrest. What was there to say? They had both known this moment might come, but knowing hadn't made it any easier to bear. "Mama," Emily's voice echoed through the jail as she burst through the entrance, followed closely by Clara and Lily. Mrs. Peterson trailed behind them, looking frazzled. "I tried to stop them," Mrs. Peterson explained to the deputy on duty, "but that oldest one is determined as a mule." Emily's face was pale but set with fierce determination as she approached the bars. "Mama, we know you didn't do anything wrong." "Oh, sweetheart," Sarah said, reaching through the bars to touch her daughter's face. "I'm so sorry you girls have to go through this." "Don't apologize," Emily said firmly. "You saved someone's life. Papa would have done the same thing." Clara pressed close to the bars, her eyes wide with worry. "When are you coming home?" Before Sarah could answer, the jail door opened again, and a young man entered. Sarah recognized him as Thomas Wright, the son of the local minister, recently returned from law school back east. He was perhaps 25, with earnest brown eyes and an air of nervous determination. "Mrs. Matthews," Thomas said, approaching her cell. "I'm here to help." "I don't understand," Sarah replied. Thomas glanced around nervously, then lowered his voice. "I've been asking questions about Captain Mitchell. Something about his investigation didn't sit right with me. So I started looking into his background, his methods." Emily stepped closer, her sharp eyes fixed on Thomas. "What did you find?" "Things that don't add up," Thomas replied carefully. "Supplies that have gone missing from the garrison. Reports that don't match witness statements. Money that should have gone to government contracts but disappeared somewhere along the way." Joshua, who had been silent until now, spoke from his cell. "You think he's corrupt?" "I think," Thomas said, "that Captain Mitchell has been using his position to enrich himself, and anyone who might expose him becomes a problem he needs to eliminate." Sarah felt a chill of understanding. He wasn't really looking for native people hiding in the area, was he, though? He was, Thomas confirmed, but I suspect he was looking for them to sell their location to the highest bidder, or to use as scapegoats for his own crimes. A hidden Indian and the woman protecting him make perfect villains. To distract from his real activities, Emily's young face hardened with an anger that reminded Sarah of William. So he's going to blame Mama and Joshua for things they didn't do. Unless we can prove what he's really been up to, Thomas said. How? Sarah asked. Thomas pulled out a small notebook. I've been documenting discrepancies in his reports, talking to people who've had dealings with him. But I need more evidence, something concrete. What kind of evidence? Joshua asked quietly. Documents? Correspondence? Something that proves he's been falsifying reports or stealing supplies. Thomas looked directly at Joshua. I know you have no reason to trust me, but I believe what Mrs. Matthews did was right, and I believe Captain Mitchell is using both of you to cover his own crimes. Emily stepped forward suddenly. I can help. Emily, no, Sarah said quickly. Mama, I'm not a little girl anymore. I can go places and hear things that adults can't. People don't pay attention to children. Thomas looked uncertain. It could be dangerous. More dangerous than letting Captain Mitchell destroy our family, Emily countered. Over the next hour, they developed a plan. Emily would return to town and observe Mitchell's activities, looking for patterns, inconsistencies, anything that seemed suspicious. Thomas would continue his investigation through official channels, requesting documents and interviewing other soldiers at the garrison. As the visit ended and the girls were reluctantly led away by Mrs. Peterson, Emily looked back at her mother through the bars. We're going to prove he's lying, Mama, and we're going to bring you home. Sarah watched her eldest daughter walk away with a mixture of pride and terror. Emily had grown up too fast in the past 3 years, but now that strength might be the only thing standing between their family and complete destruction. Across the narrow corridor, Joshua met her eyes. She brave, he said simply. To brave for her own good, Sarah replied, just like her father. But as the jail fell quiet around them, Sarah allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, that courage would be enough to save them all. Emily had always been observant, but in the week following her mother's arrest, she discovered she had a talent for invisibility that served her well. Adults, she realized, rarely noticed a 12-year-old girl sitting quietly in corners, sweeping steps, or lingering near windows. It was during one of these careful observations that she noticed Captain Mitchell's unusual routines every evening. Just as the garrison prepared for supper, he would leave the main building and walk to a small storage shed behind the blacksmith shop. He carried a leather satchel with him, and he always looked around carefully before entering. That's not normal behavior for someone with nothing to hide, Thomas agreed when Emily reported her findings. They met in secret at the back of the church, where Thomas's father couldn't overhear their conversations. Can you get into that shed? Emily asked. Thomas shook his head. It would be breaking and entering. If I'm caught, any evidence I found would be worthless in court. Emily studied his face with a calculating expression that reminded everyone of her father. But if someone accidentally left something where they shouldn't have, and you happen to find it, Emily, absolutely not. It's the dangerous. But Emily Matthews had inherited more than William's intelligence. She had also inherited his stubborn streak and his willingness to take risks for the people he loved. 2 nights later, she crept from Mrs. Peterson's house after everyone was asleep. The shed behind the blacksmith shop was protected by a simple lock. But Emily had spent years watching her father repair everything on their property. She knew locks. And more importantly, she knew that most people were careless about securing things they thought no one would look for. The lock was old and poorly maintained. After 20 minutes of patient work with a hairpin, it clicked open. Inside the shed, Emily found exactly what Thomas had hoped for and more than they had dared to expect. Crates of military supplies that should have been distributed to outposts, documents showing sales of government property to private buyers, and most damning of all, correspondence between Mitchell and various buyers, including detailed plans to blame missing supplies on Indian raids that had never occurred. But it was the final document that made Emily's blood run cold. A letter outlining Mitchell's plan to use Sarah and Joshua as scapegoats for a major theft of military supplies, painting them as part of a native conspiracy to arm hostile tribes. Emily carefully selected the most incriminating documents, leaving the originals in place but taking detailed notes on everything she saw. She was replacing the lock when she heard footsteps approaching. Her heart hammered as she pressed herself against the side of the building, staying perfectly still as Captain Mitchell walked past, so close she could have reached out and touched him. He paused at the shed door, checking the lock, then continued on his way. The next morning, Thomas stared at Emily's copied documents with growing amazement and horror. "This is it," he breathed. "This proves everything. He's been stealing from the military for months, selling supplies on the black market, and now he's planning to frame your mother and Joshua for his crimes. What do we do with it?" Emily asked. "We take it to the federal marshal. Mitchell may have authority in this region, but he answers to higher powers." Thomas looked at Emily with newfound respect. "You realize what you've done, don't you? You've not only cleared your mother and Joshua, you've exposed a conspiracy that could have hurt a lot of innocent people." Emily felt a strange mix of pride and exhaustion. "I just wanted to bring my family home. You've done that and more," Thomas assured her. "But now we need to move quickly. If Mitchell realizes his documents are compromised, he might try to destroy the evidence or disappear entirely." As they prepared to contact the federal authorities, Emily allowed herself to believe for the first time since the arrest that her family might truly be safe. The evidence was overwhelming, and soon everyone would know that Captain Mitchell was the real criminal. But first, she had one more stop to make. Her mother and Joshua had been in jail long enough. It was time to tell them that their ordeal was almost over. Standing outside the jail, Emily squared her shoulders and walked through the door, with the confidence of someone who held the key to everything in her young hands. The federal marshal arrived in Millbrook on a cold December morning, his presence causing a stir throughout the small town. Marshal Davidson was a weathered man in his 50s, with steel gray hair and the kind of steady demeanor that came from years of dealing with corruption and criminals in frontier territories. Thomas Wright met him at the train station, carrying a carefully organized portfolio of evidence that Emily had risked everything to obtain. "Mr. Wright," Marshal Davidson said after reviewing the documents, "this is some of the most comprehensive evidence of military corruption I have seen in my career. How did you come by these copies?" Thomas had prepared for this question. An anonymous source provided them. Someone who was concerned about Captain Mitchell's activities but feared retaliation if they came forward directly. The marshal nodded, understanding the delicate nature of such situations, anonymous or not. "This evidence is damning. I'll need to conduct my own investigation. But based on what you've shown me, Captain Mitchell will be facing federal charges within hours." Marshal Davidson had taken control of the situation. Captain Mitchell was arrested at the garrison, his furious protests falling on deaf ears as federal agents secured his office and the storage shed behind the blacksmith shop. "This is outrageous," Mitchell shouted as he was led away in chains. "Those people were harboring a dangerous fugitive. I was doing my duty." "Your duty," Marshal Davidson replied calmly, "was to serve your country honestly. Instead, you've been stealing from it and using innocent people as scapegoats for your crimes." By afternoon, Sarah and Joshua were freed. Sarah emerged from the jail into the winter sunlight, blinking at the brightness after days in the dim cell. Her daughters rushed toward her, and she found herself surrounded by their arms, their tears, their relieved laughter. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered to Emily, holding her eldest daughter tight. "But don't you ever take such risks again." "I won't have to," Emily replied with a small smile. "We're safe now." Joshua stood quietly nearby, watching the family reunion with a mixture of joy and uncertainty. His legal troubles were over, but his future remained unclear. Where did a native man go in a world that still saw him as an outsider, even when he had been proven innocent of any wrongdoing? As if reading his thoughts, Sarah turned to him, her hand extended. "Come here," she said simply. "You're part of this family now." The words hung in the air, carrying more weight than any legal proclamation. Joshua took her hand, and for the first time since his own people had betrayed him, he felt like he truly belonged somewhere. That evening, the Matthews family returned to their small house. In the forest, everything looked exactly as they had left it, but somehow it felt different, safer, more permanent, more like home. Thomas Wright joined them for supper, having been invited by Emily, who insisted he was as much responsible for their freedom as anyone. "What will you do now?" Thomas asked Joshua as they sat around the table that had seen so many quiet conversations. During Joshua's recovery stay, "If Sarah will have me," Joshua replied, looking at the woman who had risked everything to save his life. "Help raise these girls, build this business we started, make a life worth the chances that were taken to preserve it." Sarah reached across the table and took his hand. "We'll have you," she said softly, "for as long as you want to stay outside." The first snow of winter began to fall, blanketing the forest in pristine white. But inside the small house, around a table filled with simple food and surrounded by people who had chosen to love each other, despite the world's prejudices, it felt like spring. The hardest part of their journey was over. Now came the beautiful work of building a life together, one day at a time. Spring arrived early that year, painting the forest around the Matthews house with delicate green buds and the sweet fragrance of wild honeysuckle. 6 months had passed since Captain Mitchell's arrest, and the season seemed to mirror the transformation that had taken place within the small household. Sarah stood at her kitchen window, watching Joshua teach Clara and Lily how to identify different bird calls in the morning chorus. His patient voice carried through the open window as he explained the difference between a cardinal's sharp whistle and a robin's melodic song. "That's a wood thrush," he was saying, his hand cupped behind his ear. "Listen to how it sounds like a flute." The girl stood perfectly still, concentrating with the seriousness children brought to lessons from adults they truly respected. Clara had become Joshua's most devoted student in wood carving, while Lily had developed an uncanny ability to spot the perfect pieces of driftwood and fallen branches that would become his next creations. Emily approached the window to stand beside her mother, now 13 and taller than Sarah remembered from just months before. "The Hendersons placed another order yesterday," Emily reported, holding up a list written in her neat handwriting. 3 bowls, a set of kitchen utensils, and one of those carved jewelry boxes that Mrs. Peterson says all the ladies in town are talking about. Sarah smiled at her daughter's businesslike efficiency. Emily had appointed herself the official manager of their woodworking enterprise, keeping meticulous records of orders, payments, and materials needed. The income from Joshua's craftsmanship had not only secured their winter but had begun to provide them with small luxuries they hadn't enjoyed since William's death. "Any word from Thomas?" Sarah asked. "He'll be here for supper on Sunday," Emily replied. "He says he has something important to discuss with you and Joshua." Sarah nodded, though she suspected she already knew what Thomas wanted to talk about. Over the past months, he had become a regular visitor to their home, drawn initially by his role in their legal troubles but staying because of the genuine friendship that had developed between them all. More recently, his conversations with Joshua had taken on a different tone. Discussions about legal rights, land ownership, and the possibility of official recognition of Joshua's status in the community. The sound of wagon wheels on the dirt road interrupted her thoughts. Through the window, she could see Dr. Martin's familiar carriage approaching their gate. "Wonder what brings him by," Emily mused. Dr. Martin had become an unexpected ally after the truth about Captain Mitchell came to light. The elderly physician had publicly apologized for the community's treatment of Joshua and had been instrumental in helping other townspeople see past their prejudices. Sarah opened the door before he could knock. "Dr. Martin, what a pleasant surprise." "Sarah, my dear," he said, removing his hat. "I hope you don't mind the unannounced visit, but I have some news I thought you and Joshua should hear directly from me." Joshua approached from the yard, the girls trailing behind him like devoted apprentices. "Doctor." Joshua greeted him with a respectful nod. "Joshua, good to see you looking so well." Dr. Martin's expression grew serious but not unkind. "I've just come from a meeting with the territorial governor's representative. There's been a decision regarding your legal status." Sarah felt her heart skip. Despite their freedom and the community's growing acceptance, Joshua's position remained technically precarious under territorial law. "The governor has granted you official residency status," Dr. Martin announced, his weathered face breaking into a smile. "You're legally free to live and work anywhere in the territory. No one can question your right to be here." The silence that followed was profound. Then Lily clapped her hands together with pure joy, and Clara let out a whoop that startled the birds from the nearby trees. But it was Joshua's expression that moved Sarah most deeply. For a moment, his carefully maintained composure cracked, and she saw the depth of uncertainty he had been carrying, the fear that despite everything, he might still be forced to leave. "It's official then," he said quietly. "I can truly stay." "You could always truly stay," Sarah said, stepping close enough to take his hand. "Some things don't require papers to make them real." That evening, as the family gathered around their table for supper, Sarah looked at each face illuminated by the soft lamplight. Emily, serious and capable beyond her years, but still young enough to laugh at Lily's silly jokes. Clara, her hands already showing the small cuts and calluses that came from learning to work with wood, her eyes bright with the curiosity that drove her to ask endless questions. Lily, still small enough to sit on Joshua's lap while he told stories, but old enough to understand that their family was different from others, and that different could be wonderful. And Joshua himself, no longer the wounded stranger she had found in the forest, but a man who had found his place in the world through love, acceptance, and the patient work of building trust one day at a time. Outside, the spring evening settled around their small house like a gentle blessing. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new orders to fill, new opportunities to prove that families could be built through choice rather than just blood. That love could bridge any divide if people were brave enough to reach across it. Sarah Matthews, widow and mother, looked around her table and realized that somewhere in the process of saving Joshua's life, he had helped save theirs as well. They had all been broken in different ways, by loss, by betrayal, by the cruelty of a world that often chose fear over compassion. But in choosing to trust each other, to build something beautiful together, they had discovered that broken things, when carefully mended, could become stronger than they had ever been before. As Joshua began another of his stories about the forest spirits that watched over good people, Sarah closed her eyes and listened to the sound of her family's laughter mixing with the evening songs of the birds outside. This, she thought, was what happiness felt like when it finally came home to stay.